Hey, I'm Roland, and today we're taking a very quick and dirty look at the OnePlus 5T. So the 5T is the follow-up to the OnePlus 5, which I have in my right hand here. And as you can see, OnePlus is now also switching to the 18:9 form factor with a FHD Plus panel that is a bit stretched compared to the 16:9 panel that still was on the OnePlus 5. So you're losing the big bezels that the OnePlus 5 had. You're also losing the fingerprint reader on the front, which now moves to the back. And what you gain is thin bezels. They're not as thin as on the Mate 10 or Mate 10 Pro from Huawei, for example, but still a pretty good job of thinning the bezels around the display is happening here. And what you also get is a Gorilla Glass 5 cover, which is here covered with a plastic foil, which already has a bunch of scratches, but it should definitely be pretty scratch resistant concerning the glass itself. What you also get are slightly rounded corners, as you can see down here. They're a bit rounded off, so that looks pretty nice actually. You also get a OLED panel in here, which is running at 2160 by 1080 pixels, but it still has a diamond pixel matrix, which means it's not as crisp and clear as a comparable LCD panel, which has an RGB matrix, but still fonts are pretty nicely legible. They're pretty crisp, but they could be a bit more crisp when using an LCD. Up top, you also get a 16 megapixel camera that's up here that's got an f2.0 aperture. Right next to that are a bunch of sensors plus your earpiece, which is covered with a metal grill, so not a lot of dust gets in there. At the bottom, on-screen buttons this time and no hardware buttons on the front. The bezels on the sides are pretty slim, but they're not as thin as a bunch of other devices that are out in the market right now. But still overall a pretty good look from the front, although it looks a bit generic compared to all the other devices that have pretty much the same design. If you hold the two devices next to each other, so the OnePlus 5 on the right and the OnePlus 5T on the left, you'll notice that height-wise they have changed only a little, so the new one is about 1 or 2 millimeters longer, but overall width and depth and height are pretty much the same. Let's move over to the back, where you'll see there is a pretty big camera hump here, which has grown a little compared to the last version. In there are two 20 megapixel Sony sensors that have different, they both have a 1.7 aperture, but they have different sensors, and one of them is only used when it gets really dark, so you will gain a bit better low light performance. You're losing the telezoom feature that was on the older model. Right next to it is your dual LED flash plus one of the noise cancelling mics. In the middle is the fingerprint sensor, which I can't use right now as this device is not mine. And under that is the OnePlus logo. The whole thing is covered in this nice looking unibody anodized aluminum casing. You also have the typical antenna bands running around the top and the bottom. They're looking a bit like on the iPhone 7, for example. But overall, it's a pretty nice look, not too much of a change compared to the last model. Looking at the bottom, you get a single speaker that's bottom firing. Doesn't have the best sound, but still there is a direct sound feature in here, which should give you pretty good audio through the headset. In the middle is the USB Type-C port, which sadly only supports USB 2.0. Could be a bit better using 3.1, for example. Right next to that is the speech mic and your 3.5 millimeter headset jack that is still sticking around and not being replaced. Looking at the top, there's pretty much nothing up here. And going down the sides, you'll see the dual SIM slot right here, which is for 2 nano SIMs and no SD card reader. So OnePlus is still not returning to using a micro SD card reader for storage extension. Down here is your power button, which sits pretty tightly and doesn't wobble at all. And going over to the left, you also get the volume rocker, which also is pretty nicely built. And up top is the notification switch, so you can switch between no, just a few, or all notifications that are coming in, and decide yourself if you want to be notified. Let's take a look at the inside or the software. So we're running Android 7.1.1 Nougat. They haven't upgraded to Android Oreo yet, but that will probably happen sometime pretty soon, I guess. And looking at the innards, you will end up with a device that is pretty much similar to the OnePlus 5T. So you get the Snapdragon 835 octa-core SoC in here, running at 4.5 gigahertz maximum core clock, plus 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes UFS storage, which is the faster flash standard that you nowadays always want on your phone for higher transmission rates. So this is the top model, coming back at 128 gigabytes and 8 gigs of RAM. There will also be a basic model that will have 6 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigabytes of that UFS storage. Yeah, and that is pretty much it. It will be out pretty soon, launching towards the end of November. In Europe, it will cost just the same as the OnePlus 5, which launched at $499 for the 64 gig model and going up to 559 euros on the higher end version with 128 gigabytes of flash storage and 8 gigabytes of RAM. That was a quick look at the OnePlus 5T.